I call the member for Bowman.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And in supporting this National Health Amendment, we've just heard from the member for denial, unable to admit that we have a financial challenge in this country. Look, it's as if members on the government side actually wake up in the morning and dream of ways to make it tougher for people to access healthcare, and nothing could be further from the truth. We've inherited a budget bottom line that was in dire need of answers, and of course, even in opposition, this side of politics is showing that they can't contribute to that national conversation about how we restore the budget bottom line and get ourselves back to balanced budgets. With this National Health Amendment, there is a one-time January 1, 2015 increase to the pharmaceutical co-payment for concession and non-concession holders. It's not the first time that it's been done. The actual notion of a co-payment was introduced by, yes, the party that you hear railing against us today. The notion that pensioners should pay a co-payment was introduced by the party over there that's railing against these changes today. And as recently as 2004, it was the member for Shortland actually in this chamber supporting an increase to the co-payment in 2004. She was here supporting that increase when it suited her. The member for Shortland, short on detail, short on a clear understanding of how the PBS even works, short even on an understanding of how cabinet processes work in approving drugs, is no person to convince the Australian public that these changes are not absolutely vital. We don't have to go back too far to 2011. No, there's very short memories in this chamber sometimes, Deputy Speaker, but it was 2011 when the Labor Party had their shot at making the PBAC sustainable. And of course the PBS system, approaching $9 billion a year at the time, needed some answers for sustainability. And so it's worth turning to the language of the then Labor Health Minister when they were coming up with their own solutions. And as they said, in the next 12 months, we will work on a long-term plan to keep costs down. So let's do a little bit of compare and contrast, because what we're talking about today is just slightly increasing the co-payment, less than $1 for those with concession cards, about for 40 to 50% of Australians. And let's see how Labor responded to a similar challenge. Labor's idea wasn't to listen to the expertise of the PBAC, to take the recommendations and blindly, non-politically introduce newly listed drugs once approved as being both safe, high quality and cost effective. No. Labor decided to reinvent that process. Now, the first thing that the Labor government did was to grind back the approval of new listings. And if you have a look, I can see there was already some falls in 2006 and 2007. But what this Labor Party was really good at, and they can be so very proud of it, I'm sure, is that they were able to reduce the number of drugs listed while they were in government. They ground them down and made the approval processes longer and more convoluted to do everything they could to stop the drug being listed and having a financial impact on their bottom line. There will be thousands, no, millions of Australians affected by that short-sighted conduct who will never have a voice in this chamber. And of course, when that did not work, they came up with a new idea. It was called deferral. And that is when the expert body, the PBAC, fully evaluated, considered safety, quality, efficacy and cost effectiveness, struck a price through the pricing authority, and then the Labor government said, no, we refuse the recommendation of the expert body. We politicise the process for the first time. And bad luck to you if you have a child who's failing to thrive. Bad luck to you if you're suffering from HIV, TB, lung disease, renal failure, diabetes, schizophrenia or depression. Bad luck. We are not delivering this drug to you for no other reason than we've decided in Cabinet we're just not going to sign it off. That is what the PBAC process descended to under Kevin Rudd and then Julie Gillard. Now, to tell those patients that there is no other reason except that these drugs, these humble 7 drugs, were not life-saving. Rub that in the face of a person suffering with a lifelong condition where this global breakthrough is now deemed to be cost-effective by the experts. Never in history had that been done before. Look, I will concede there had been delays to listings, and particularly under Atagi, and we had a large run of fascinating absolutely transformative vaccines in the early 2000s, and there were delays to listing these vaccines, but they sat on that cabinet table until they were passed, and passed they were. But no, that's not how the Labor Party operated. They told those drug companies to go jump. They told those patients, you can wait. And the insult, to cap it all off, like topping on dessert, they said, no, that's not a refusal. We haven't refused your drug. We've just deferred it, and we're not going to tell you when we're going to approve it. And a deferral without a date, Deputy Speaker, that's a downright rejection. I don't care what the Labor Party wanted to call it. We've moved on from that, okay? We've moved on. Under a new government, a coalition government, we've already approved 131 listings in the short time we've been in power. Why? Because money doesn't get in the way of an expert's recommendation, unlike the Labor Party. They never had the courage, they never had the heart to come in here and talk to patients suffering from those conditions. No, they just said it's a deferral, you can wait, and we won't tell you how long. That, Deputy Speaker, that is the epitome of heartlessness and lack of consideration. And isn't it ironic that we're debating the amendment to this National Health and the co-payment for the PBS on the day when Labor walked into a brick wall by moving their MPI this afternoon on health? And so there we had the doctors versus the autocrats. You had the coalition speakers who know how a health system works up against a mob who've done nothing more than lead union rallies at the instruction of the nurses union that appeared to be today. And didn't they walk into a brick wall when they faced the health minister, who told them in no uncertain terms that this was a put-up MPI to serve their union mates? Today what we're debating obviously is sustainability. And I can remember 5 years ago we were all fearful of this massive increase in the PBS. Life-saving drugs were coming through. We'd had the what we called the blockbuster drugs at the turn of the century. And then, of course, no sooner had they arrived nor come off patent, but were being hit by the companion diagnostics and the designer drugs. The PBS trajectory was diabolical. It was a single intervention by then Health Minister Tony Abbott, simple price disclosure, that resulted in the change in trajectory that has brought some semblance of normality back to the increase in the PBS budget. And price disclosure, without going into great detail, is simply the requirement that pharmacies disclose the prices that they're receiving their drugs from their wholesaler, so that the government knows that they're genuinely reimbursing the pharmacist for the cost of that drug, not for a fake cost that's listed by somebody else. And so instead of significant transfers over and above the cost a pharmacist was paying, we're now slowly, asymptotically moving back to the real cost of that drug to the pharmacist and reimbursing that accordingly. But tonight I need to concede, and to pharmacists in my electorate, that that has to have an effect on the bottom line. We may well have tamed the PBS budget, but we know that many community pharmacists are doing it really hard with these changes. And because of the way price disclosure is cyclical, Deputy Chair, these prices are closely and more closely approximating the real price every 18-month cycle. And so there still are significant challenges ahead for our pharmacists in our communities who understandably were relying on those terms of trade transfers. I mean, that was built into their bottom line. That's how they were running their budget and employing their staff. So I've got great concern for our pharmacists, and I accept that there will be a period of great transition. But ultimately, I guess our responsibility to the taxpayer is to pay the price that's listed when it's handed to the pharmacist that they pay. In return, that reimbursement needs to match that amount. Now, of course, we also need to remember, and it's often forgotten, that with the co-payment currently sitting at $36.90 and about to increase by $5, that increase only applies if you're buying a drug that costs more than that. Now, I am lucky and my family's lucky, we haven't needed to purchase truly expensive drugs. If they are very expensive, you don't pay more than the co-payment. But the important point to mention is that a huge number of drugs cost less than the co-payment, in which case increasing the co-payment has no impact at all. Now, up to 55% of all the drugs listed are actually cheaper than that non-concessionaire co-payment level. So that means no effect if you increase the co-payment. It's only in those rare circumstances where people are filling scripts for drugs worth more than $42.90, and increasingly that's a rare event. For those who are non-concession card holders, it's about 2 prescriptions a year. It's worth remembering that we are not dealing with people carrying in dozens of prescriptions and filling them every month. For those patients, we do have the PBS safety net. And I concede that we're increasing each year the threshold by 2 prescriptions. But for the many people that access that safety net, it's a lifesaver. Once again, it was a coalition initiative to bring that co-payment to the health system. Look, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else but Australia if I had to choose a health system. And the 4 pillars, the PBS, the MBS, our public hospitals and private health do an incredible job. The PBS system has presented us with significant challenges. And even now, manufacturers say to us, in Australia we know if we can get listed on the PBS, that represents almost instantaneous penetration to a 23 million population. Australia still remains very much a jewel in the crown of approvals. And all around the world, they accept that while there may be delays, it's worth striking a price in Australia because of how efficiently our PBS serves our population. Take it from those that are supplying our PBS as much as those who are purchasing from it. The other great message we're hearing is please rapidly approve the life-saving breakthrough drugs that are making a difference, even if we have to re-look again at the generic market. And increasingly in Australia, if we do have a weakness in our PBS system, it is that we pay we strike a very strong price with the original approvals. But once we pass what we call the off-patent period, at that point we continue, because of price referencing, to probably pay more than those generic drugs either cost to produce or are worth. And increasingly, as you compare the generic prices in this country to those overseas, we still have a long way to go. Price referencing is playing a role, but we still have further to go. We now have international generic manufacturers moving in, putting generic local domestic manufacturers under pressure. That's hard too. In the end, Australia has to say we need to inspect where these facilities are manufacturing pharmaceuticals around the world. They need to get their TGA approval, and then after that it's a free market. So Australian manufacturers are responding accordingly. Increasingly, we're making a smaller range of pharmaceuticals and exporting them overseas, particularly in places where people value that Made in Australia stamp on a pharmaceutical, which is not insignificant, given that we have had challenges even here in Australia about imported drugs coming from other parts of the world that in the end we discovered were manufactured in less than safe and appropriate conditions. I made very brief mention, and it does need more ventilation in this place, the notion of companion diagnostics. This is increasingly the tailoring of pharmaceuticals to help to specifically treat a condition that you may have that's identified on your genome. This will mean smaller and smaller numbers of patients that benefit from a discovery, and obviously to recoup costs, you will see manufacturers increasingly wanting a higher and higher price for their treatments and cures because they know it has effectively a 100% success rate. One of the great challenges, and if not, may I say, a failing of current drug funding arrangements are that we increasingly, and have historically, we pay for the drug whether it works or not. Where we are heading is paying for an outcome. And increasingly government will be identifying the subpopulations that respond to treatment and rewarding pharmaceutical companies for that. But we're not going to be writing blank cheques or bigger cheques for treating people where a clinical outcome is not achieved. Look, none of us went into politics to increase a co-payment. Deputy Speaker, none of us went into politics to increase any form of charge if we could possibly avoid it. But I'm sensing that the Australian people are beginning to appreciate that these were decisions we were forced to make. When we woke up after that election, we knew we had a momentous job. And I concede that convincing people that $667 billion is a large figure is not an easy task. None at all. Nor is it easy to take even the smallest payment or entitlement away from any individual that I know or that I meet in the street. But these are modest, small, well-calculated, well-thought-through changes. And they're changes that have been made before. They're changes that have been supported by the Labor Party. For heaven's sake, the co-payment is a creature of the Labor Party. Making pensioners pay a co-payment is a creature of the Labor Party. And to hear the member for Shortland with the same old tired talking points just shows a party yet to realise where they are, yet to realise that they have to be part of a national dialogue around solutions. As much as they can come up with the cheap stunts now about cuts, in the end they'll have to add up their own recommendations and what they voted for, and this will come off their own bottom line as an opposition party. Well, for now, we will do the hard yards. For now, we will lean against the wall of reform and make sure that we have a sustainable PBS because we're up for it. And thank goodness the opposition isn't, and they're on the side of this chamber where they belong for the moment. We'll make those tough decisions with the PBS and with Medicare, but we're going to make it sustainable as a result. And I think as people look through the detail, they'll realise that the combination of a safety net and these small changes will keep our beloved PBS in Australia for a long, long time to come. It's a global showpiece, and I defend its sustainability tonight.